In the debate, the topic of Jesus' genealogy came up.
I know we're offered up a genealogy both in Matthew chapter 1 and in Luke chapter 3, but those genealogies give us the putative genealogy of Joseph, not Jesus. And if the claims of Matthew and Luke that Jesus was born to a virgin are to be taken seriously, then Joseph's genealogy is irrelevant. Don't tell me that Joseph, that God gave up Jesus for adoption to Joseph, because that doesn't make sense. So how then could someone born of a virgin be the Messiah, because that claim disqualifies him from being the Messiah? See, that's an internal question.
Yeah. Before I continue, I want to tell you a story that I think is applicable to how this discussion is going to play out. There's a guy, and he goes to see a psychologist. And the reason is he thinks he's dead. He really believes he's dead. I know that is strange, but that is why the guy is there. The psychologist has tried everything to convince him otherwise. But this man just cannot accept the fact that he is not dead. So the psychologist finally sends him home with some medical textbooks and says, read these, come back in a month, and tell me what you've learned. So the month is over, and the man returns to his office. And the doctor says, what have you learned? And the man said that he learned that dead people do not bleed. So the doctor said, great, leaned over and pricked him with a needle, and the man began to bleed. And the doctor said, what do you think about that? And the man said, well, I guess dead people do bleed. This story is meant to call out a particular bias called confirmation bias. I guess you could also say the man was in denial. But confirmation bias is how we are going to use this story. Now, if you are a follower of the rabbis, you probably believe that this story explains very well the Christian movement. We have the New Testament. And once we read it, then we go to the Old Testament and look for everywhere Jesus could be inferred with our Jesus glasses on, right? Because we have to have those glasses on. And then point to that as our hope, hence confirmation bias. And if you are a follower of the Messianic movement, then you probably think that this explains the followers of the rabbis very well, too. Because no matter what you tell them, they seem also to just focus on their biases. Once we get the rabbi's followers out of confirmation bias, they'll probably enter cognitive dissonance or maybe doublethink first. And these can be very difficult places to be because it is the beginning of the lack of knowledge, which is very harsh. But they'd more than likely say that about us too. So how do we resolve this conundrum? Well, we both should do it with the Word of God. Either with the Greek Tanakh. It is more accurate than saying the dumb word Septuagint, I believe. Or we do it with the Hebrew Tanakh. We can also go into what they believe is wrong with the New Testament. And that is fine to discuss, but there are also problems with the Old Testament. And for the most part, these are the only methods we can use. And to be honest, most people in the world could care less that we even care what each other thinks. So we're kind of unique in that respect. One of the teaching methods that God uses on Adam and Eve is called the deductive teaching method. You can Google it, but it can also be said to be the inductive teaching method, but we'll deal with the former rather than the later. It begins with a rule Adam and Eve could not understand, and that is because the rule and the rule giver were both good. You cannot expect Adam and Eve to pass a moral problem without moral knowledge. Had they had moral knowledge, which is what the knowledge of good and evil is, they would not have even needed the rule in the first place. God gives us a rule about how to determine who the Messiah of Israel be, and it kind of feels like the Garden of Eden. And that is to base the Messiah on the life of Moses. So all the life of Moses is a potential prophecy about how this son of David will rise up. Here's the rule. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your fellow Israelites. You must listen to him. Now, the rabbis are very, very aware of what I'm going to say. And they are aware of how much of a potential problem it will be for them to rebut this. So, their hermeneutic on this resembles the theological version of the book of 1984 by George Orwell. It just does not make any sense if you want to be honest with yourselves. Like, this kind of scares us Christians when we talk to you about this, but I'm gonna move past that fear. The rabbis have a lot of power in Israel and in the Jewish community, unfortunately. They are like the ministry of truth, and they use that power and authority to, like the thought police do in 1984, or the thought theological police, to stop dissent at any cost. They'll lie, or maybe dissemble is a better word. They'll use the police, whatever they can, and the supposed best of them will run from debates claiming that running means that they are in some way not afraid. But then debate unknowns. And that is no stab at Solberg, who are just now learning the issues between our two communities. Wake up, Jews. Can't you see this? Your number one apologists are running from our top apologists. The good thing about the cowards that represent you is now that you know that they are all running from debating our leaders. They can make up whatever excuses they want, but we all know why. You have to then make up your own minds and think for yourself. Could you imagine King David saying, Goliath is radioactive. Who says that they can defeat anybody in a fight? I'm going to just avoid that guy. I don't want to get tarnished. Heroes don't talk like that. Cowards talk like that. Anyhow, I digress. Tanakh is the truth. And the rabbis have been wrong many times in your history. Just look at your history. But Tanakh still stands. So I'm going to read this to you now. But first, I am going to tell you what I see. Dead people do bleed. Okay? So listen. Now Joshua, the son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hands on him. And the sons of Israel listened to him and did as the Lord commanded Moses. So, what does this say? Joshua has now been selected to lead Israel. I think we can all agree on that. And what does the next verse say after Joshua was selected? Since that time, what time? That time. No prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. For all the signs and wonders which the Lord sent to perform in the land of Egypt against the Pharaoh and all his servants and all his land, and for all the mighty power and all the great terror which Moses performed in the sight of Israel. Here it is confirmed that Joshua is not the one Moses was talking about in Deuteronomy 18. Now, this is where we usually lose you. And you tell us that dead people do bleed, but I'm going to continue, so just calm down. You don't have to let the thought police meddle with common sense. I mean, it's so obvious, it's just common sense. You are probably thinking now, how the hell is this hell? Why would I use that word? Is this going to be about Jesus, son of David? David adopted Jesus and therefore cannot be the Messiah. However, remember that Moses was adopted. Yeah, Moses was adopted. I'm not lying. You all know that. And the prophet has to be like Moses. I know that this sucks for you who believe otherwise, but the prophet has to be like Moses, and it's not Joshua. So then, if the Messiah was not adopted, then he does not qualify to be the Messiah. Calm down. So there was a prophecy that the Messiah had to be adopted, that the Pharisees missed. Nothing wrong with that, it happens. What else did they miss, though? Because of this adoption into a royal line, Moses could have been the ruler of Egypt, it is said. And Moses was also, as we learn later, from a priestly line as well. Sound familiar? So was Jesus. Jesus was adopted into the royal line of David, but is also a priest in the order of Melchizedek, a priesthood which predates the Levitical priesthood. Do you remember this promise? I will set him over my house, temple, and my kingdom. His throne will be established forever. Do you also remember when God said to Moses, "Then the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you as God to Pharaoh." The first Moses was as a God. The second Moses was God. The parallels are so simple, and there are many more. Dead people do bleed. Now that is 4 really important details that Moses and Jesus share that make them like each other, and Joshua doesn't share these. Both are not only adopted, but into a royal line. Both are also priests, and both have the name Elohim associated to them. I could go on, but I don't want to bore you. I know you want me to get to the point. According to Rabbi Singer, the adoption of Jesus by David disqualifies him as the Messiah, because David's genealogy becomes irrelevant, because it is David's genealogy, and it's not Jesus' genealogy. According to God, though, through the Torah and the life of Moses, if the Messiah was not adopted like Moses was, that disqualifies him. Or Moses. Especially since the Messiah had to be born of a virgin. Hence, no human father. Was Isaiah too stupid to realize that when he used the word Alma instead of the Hebrew word for woman, which you translated as Isha? Come on. Following a man, especially when he is a coward running from the best apologists, is idolatry. We have to let Tanakh be our guide, not the rules and doctrines of coward men. We clearly have a prophecy of the adoption of the Messiah of Israel. And now, all that really matters here is, how does God look at genealogy when there's an adoption? Not me, Or your blessed rabbi with an incredible brain, I hear.
But Rabbi Singer, most of you know his brain is brilliant. And tonight we want to give you the opportunity to ask him your most probing questions.
What does God think when you adopt someone? They aren't really your son or daughter because you chose them and did not give birth to them? If that is true, then they really can't be your real father or mother either. Or do you really become a real father and mother to the child, which would mean that they take on your genealogy? Well, what is right? What does God say? The answer to these questions is also given in the life of Moses, in the story about God killing the firstborn of Egypt. Moses goes to the Pharaoh and tells him that Israel is God's firstborn son. Remember, Jesus is David's firstborn son. Or is that not important anymore? After which Moses makes clear that if the Pharaoh does not let God's firstborn go, that he will then kill the firstborn of the Pharaoh. The message of these two verses is paramount to how God understands adoption and where Israel's genealogy really starts, not with Abraham, but with God. The implicit message of Exodus 4, verses 22 to 23, is that Israel was the same to God as Pharaoh's firstborn son was to him. Hence, no defense for your rabbis. You are God's real child, though you are adopted. It is not viewed that way by God. And the Son of God's genealogy starts with David, though he was also adopted. He was a real son of David, as foretold by the prophets. The ironic thing about this is that you can disqualify yourselves as God's son by not accepting Jesus' genealogy. Please, this is so simple. Though you are adopted by God, you are treated as a real son. I cannot emphasize this enough. The rabbis have lost the narrative. All they have now is fear and intimidation. Your rabbis are cowards. They're running. They are running. Open your eyes. Prick yourselves. There is no way to deny any of this. Dead people do bleed.